the Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
So you're in Florence, Italy. You've been there for a month. Is this what I'm understanding?
You are understanding that correctly. Yes, Stephen.
I think I'm living my life wrong right now. So
yeah,
welcome to the show. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead,
Marisa.
I was
just going to say, I came to Italy because I wanted to really kind of immerse myself in more culture and get a wider perspective than just being in the continental United States. Mike knows, I shared with him when we caught up the other day, that I've been living in Hawaii for the last 5 years, and that has had a really profound effect on my practice. So yeah, that traveling piece is all it's cracked up to be, is what I would say.
I'm trying to figure out a way to work at least a month a year somewhere else, just work remotely and just live in that culture. So yeah, I think you're doing it right. So anyway, welcome everyone to the show. I'm Steven Sakash here again with Mike Lusky. Today, we're diving into a leadership approach that's gaining momentum in today's evolving business landscape. Thank goodness. Warm leadership. Unlike traditional leadership rooted in rules and control, warm leadership is about presence, resonance, creating conditions where greatness can naturally emerge. We're going to dive into this. I'm excited for this one. Mike, introduce our guest.
Absolutely, Stephen, and I'm super fired up about it as well. We have a great guest with us today. Not only is she an incredible leader herself, former colleague of mine as well. So our guest today is Marisa Valente. She's an executive coach, and she's also the founder of the Center for Modern Workforce Strategy. Marisa's also pioneered a way in redefining leadership through warmth, presence, and human connection, which we know our audience loves to hear about. She helps executives and teams merge strength with care, moving beyond just the rigid structures that exist in leadership styles of the past, let's say, and then essentially empowering, inspiring, and amplifying a person's highest potential. So Marisa, we're so excited to have you on the show today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be with you both.
And maybe to kick us off, Marisa, let's just start off with a little bit. Steve mentioned, warm leadership in his intro. Can you share with us a little bit about warm leadership? What it means to you, and how it differs perhaps from some of the traditional leadership models that are out there.
Yeah, warm leadership is this notion, and I think Stephen used this in the intro, and I'll just say it again for simplicity. It's merging power with deep care. So much of our business paradigm, dating back to the Industrial Revolution, is about really kind of using power in a very sort of strong and sort of traditionally masculine way to drive results. And where we are in the development of our culture, as well as thinking about human evolution writ large, we need a different strategy. We're not about creating widgets anymore. We're about facilitating creative potential. And in order for that creative potential to really be achieved, there needs to be a warmth that allows the sort of hardness of where we came from to literally melt away and reveal what is left. So there's much to say about warm leadership. We can spend a lot of time defining it with language, but what I really like to do, and where we have a lot of success in our practice with our clients and with firms that work with us, is really thinking about how they would experience warm leadership. Where have they experienced that in their life first, and then at work? And what does that mean to them? And then how do they, very uniquely using their own gifts and interests, apply that within the spheres that they have the ability to influence?
Yeah, I think when you read about where the future of business is going, and particularly this topic, however they describe it, it's really about leadership. It's not about control as much as it is curation, or even, I think I've heard the term holding space in a way, if that makes sense for people. Can you talk about how we're shifting from leadership that's rooted in rules and routine, and to one that's more about catalyzing this catalyzing human potential as leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. It's this notion of revealing what's already there, right? We're not building widgets anymore. That's the really big sort of mindset shift that we're wrapping our heads around. And I think everybody understands that intellectually, but in practice, it's really hard to move away from that. We're so used to doing things where there's an outcome that we can touch. And we see that in the language that we use around ROI. It's a question that I get a lot when I'm selling my services. Well, what's the ROI on coaching? And there is certainly very sort of compelling data around that. But I would suggest that really powerful coaching is not measurable. You can only really feel it and see it and sense it. And it's not necessarily something that you can throw into an Excel spreadsheet and really count. And that's how you know that it's working. It's this notion of revealing and sort of figuring out, well, okay, we've revealed something about this person or capability, or I think you just said that you launched your AI CMO just the other day. And what is that going to do for your company? I'm sure you have goals and ideals and objectives. And I'm imagining, and you tell me, you're waiting to see what happens. You have all these notions about what it's going to be, but you actually don't know. Just like if you were to have a baby and the baby is born and you have these ideas of what they may be or what it's like to be a parent, but you can never actually really know until you're in that moment and the next moment and the next moment. It keeps being revealed to you. It isn't actually something that you can define or demand. And that's what makes it really rich and meaningful. I'd love to hear from you, Mike or Steve. What does this mean to you, or how have you seen it realized in your work in the last little while?
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in there. First for me, I think coming from traditional organizations, you sometimes think of this empathy or this warmth as being this feel good type of thing, right? And it's just more of a concept. But I actually really have come to believe that somebody who's really mild and somebody who is empathetic is actually very strong, right? They have a lot of confidence in their approach and in their skill set. And I think, they are there, thinking like, hey, the group is stronger than the individual, right? And so for me, it's totally, flipped. Plus, when you talk about ROI, the statistics are out there that the companies that are more empathetic, that have a warmth within their culture, outperform other companies that don't. So, for me, I think it's really the change in that shift, that you don't have to be this command and control intolerant individual.
Yeah, and I think also to answer that question, I mean, yeah, just following on what Mike said, yeah, I think there is sort of ROI and things like retention and stuff like that, and if companies were able to do, their own sort of gross, domestic happiness, study or something, they'd probably find that taking that sort of leadership approach, and they'll see ROIs in those kind of numbers if they tested it. But as far as our AI Chief Marketing Officer launch, what I've kind of noticed over the years, and we notice in the demo when we've demoed it to people, but just with us interacting with clients, is whenever I've had a discussion and really getting down to their higher purpose or the deep meaning behind what they do, that's when I see the light bulb really kind of go off on them. Maybe they haven't articulated it themselves exactly, but then when I mention it, you just see them light up and they're like, exactly, and you see the energy just come forward from that. And when we went through the demo in our product and we get to this, we have a purpose builder section there that takes a whole bunch of different ways of coming to articulate a purpose for the company. And when we're with business leaders showing them that, we get that same response a lot of times. They're like, oh, that's it. Oh, this one's perfect. I just want to make a small tweak here, whatever. But you see them kind of light up and you see the energy behind that. And I think that really is one of those key elements to curating the kind of space you want in your business, right? Is where you're all able to articulate that higher purpose to some extent, or at least see it in your work.
Totally. I think that resonates a lot. You want to be able to articulate it or at least see it. I think of the notion of if you're listening to a great piece of music and you end up getting goosebumps on your arm, it's called frisson, right? You can't really measure that, but you know it. And then there are other people in the room who also have that feeling when they've heard the music, or you're at a concert or something like that. That isn't measurable, but you feel that. And if there's resonance, a lot of other people will have the same feeling, and then that creates the measurable sort of impact. It's really hard to sort of wrap one's head around what that is, because there's no kind of thing that you can hold in your hand and say, it's this, but everybody knows it. When they see it, when they feel it, there's no arguing it. And I think that sort of notion, if that's our bogey, if that's the big get, and we're working with clients or individuals who have really linear sort of preferences in terms of thinking and seeing, it's a big bridge, but it's definitely worth bridging. And it's a really interesting conversation to start with. What does warmth mean for you? When was the last time that you felt it in your life? I would welcome that question, you to answer that question, if that's something that you'd like to discuss.
I think for us too, I feel it almost every day when we're in some kind of meeting at our work. We really do take time to connect with each other, and we have these just different little rituals that really are about gratitude and things like that, to where I'm lucky enough I get to get up every morning and experience that while going to work. And I know that's not the case for so many people out there. And that's, to me, is what kind of the real tragedy is when we look at some of these statistics on just how disconnected people are from what they're spending 40, 50 hours a week doing with their lives. It's really kind of, it's like, I just keep saying the word tragic. It's very sad at times. But Marisa, I know people are familiar with this idea of kind of soft power, which, leading through influence, rather than force. But can you distinguish warm leadership as something beyond that? What's the key difference when we're talking about warm leadership?
Yeah, so I define it along a couple of different dimensions. Soft power, I think of as more of an attractive force, whereas warm leadership is about immersion. It's that notion of, like, if you have been out in the cold and then you run your hands under warm water, there's this defrosting experience and this calming experience that you have. Soft power is about persuasion. Typically, it's a counterforce to something that has been more aggressive, where warm leadership is more about resonance. Back to that point about immersion, it's this idea that you are going to emit sort of a frequency that's going to bring forward other people or experiences or circumstances that just innately resonate with other people who are kind of already in that space. Soft power tends to be sort of strategic and has a bit of an agenda, whereas warm leadership is intended to magnetize, right back to that notion of resonance. I may be playing a piece of music that I love and it doesn't resonate for you. Maybe I like to listen to rap music and you prefer classical, and that's completely fine. We have different tastes. We shouldn't necessarily be in the same listening space in that case, and let's honor our differences. Warm leadership really allows the space for those differences rather than demanding that you need to be one way. Soft power, just in any sort of traditional kind of leadership paradigm, is operating at a distance and it's intended to control. Warm leadership is something that happens up close. I think of it as sort of a teacher that was very generous in maybe a lower school sort of circumstance, that is going to sit there next to her or his students and wait for them to figure out how to articulate the words or draw the picture that's going to express what the assignment has asked, and is patient and is caring and doesn't demand, but just rather kind of facilitates the environment that lets the thing emerge when it's ready. So it's really different from that notion of operating from a distance, holding sort of a carrot and then sort of cracking a whip. It doesn't mean that it's not for adults. It's just a really different sort of environmental sort of practice that is intended to create different results, perhaps on a different time period, but that could also mean it's faster. It's really situation and person and group specific, and that's the beauty of it.
I really like the comparison there, to music, Marisa, because it sounds like, great leadership, for example, could be like music in a sense, right? That it's about resonance. A certain music, brings a certain kind of energy. There's certain sort of timing with all of it, and then it even sort of creates like this presence around. And then, going to your other point about it's more about curation than control. It kind of almost, I had the thought of, in the case of, it's almost like gardening in the sense where you're creating the right environment versus factory work, right? Where you don't just like build great teams with this sort of assembly line mentality. It's, like a garden, to get something really beautiful out of it. It's all about the right conditions. So I'm sort of curious now, Marisa, your thoughts around, how this is going to play out in, say, the modern, workplaces. What are you seeing from the organizations that you're working with, or even, organizations out there? How is this starting to play out, and how does it apply to leadership and in business?
It's a really good question, and thank you for bringing it up. It applies differently in every scenario, and I think every individual, but certainly every organization, is in a different place with this. And modern workforce strategy really prides itself on meeting the people that we work with exactly where they are. It's part of the warm leadership paradigm to not impose judgment or to have a certain timeline on a company's sort of evolution and consciousness and leadership strategy. So it really, really differs quite dramatically. The idea that you're going to lose control by being warm is a really big theme that we see across a lot of organizations that have had, candidly, a great deal of success with a more command and control sort of environment. And I think that is totally reasonable. And the command and control sort of paradigm that we developed out of the Industrial Revolution served us incredibly well. And there's really good reasons that all of the leadership practices and strategies that evolved over that arc of time, why they existed, why did they come into presence, why did they endure for as long as they did? Because they worked. And we should be thoughtful about getting rid of those things too quickly. And at the same time, we should continue to evaluate the things that we are doing that are old and ask ourselves really hard questions about, well, why? And is it still relevant? Are these the reasons that still make sense today if they made sense yesterday, or perhaps a decade ago, or perhaps 100 years ago? And what is it that I'm really trying to accomplish? And what does that really require? Just like we were saying about raising children, if we have more than one child, we also know that each child needs something a little bit different, and that may be like a different sort of arc over the course of their lifetime, and they're sort of growing up in your home. And it also may mean they need something different today because they had a hard day at school, and tomorrow they have a really big soccer game, and that requires different kind of care. So we need to also think about how we're applying sort of changes in mindset and leadership circumstantially as we are evolving an arc or a practice that we're implementing at an organization versus what a team or an individual may need kind of on a more micro time frame. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I think it totally makes sense. Feels like you also hacked our family camera, because I feel like that's totally true. It's like exactly what we go through.
Well, I mean,
No,
we've talked about this a lot on just how, consciousness is evolving, and over the centuries, business has sort of mirrored where consciousness was at. And consciousness now, it is evolving beyond that command and control, that, the Industrial Revolution kind of business model. And younger generations are coming into the workforce looking for something a little different. And if you aren't adapting with that, this is where you're going to kind of lose engagement or lose the best prospect employees, right? Can you share a little bit about how we see some of the results with this approach as we're evolving?
Yeah, that's a really good point, that the workforce that is kind of coming online now is a different generation. I'm considered a sort of older millennial. The Generation Xers who came before me and the baby boomers before them had a really different sense of what, I'll use the word apprenticeship, really meant and means, and then how they did it for the people who are coming up behind them. And the kind of most current workforce generation entering are really resistant to this sort of command and control concept of leadership. They really are allergic to it. And at the same time, they're very hungry to be apprenticed, and they want to learn and they want to be resourced. I would argue perhaps even more powerfully than millennials or Gen Xers had any expectation of. Those folks tended to believe that they would just learn by sitting in the chair for as many hours a day as they could stand and just learn by osmosis. And, beat downs were sort of expected on some level, and you just kept your mouth shut and kept going. This generation of the workforce has no tolerance for that, but they are incredibly hungry to learn and to be developed. And what they really, I think, are asking for, without necessarily having the really developed sort of language or articulation for, is this idea of being autodidactic in how they learn, and to be facilitated in how they apply their sort of self-learning on their own time and using their own real life experiences to integrate into their work, and then to be appreciated in a way that perhaps a producer in a music studio might take an artist's raw input about maybe a breakup that they just had, and how do you turn that into beautiful lyrics and then put harmonies and bass and chorus behind all of that. It's a really different thing altogether. It's a totally different animal. I think the more mature generations are a little bit curious, maybe to put it generously, about how they're supposed to do that. And yet we're all being stretched, because it's such an interesting invitation, and it's quite universal. I see it across the world. I have clients globally of all different ages and stages in life. And these young folks are incredibly interested in self-awareness, and they're doing a lot of self-development work at a very early age. And they really expect for that to be given major brownie points, and for us as their sort of leaders and mentors to figure out what to do with that. So yeah, it's a really interesting question. I don't have a great answer for you. It's
I would start with, like, leaders. If the younger generations really were going to be in self-aware leaders, you really need to be self-aware yourself. You need to start with that, because otherwise they're just going to be looking at you like, okay, this person's got this, and this issue, and I'm just getting more disengaged by the second. We've got an audience question here. Let's throw that up here. Marisa, if you could redesign corporate leadership training from the ground up, what's one key element you'd make non-negotiable?
That's a great question.
It's a really good question, and thank you to the audience member who invited that. I would say, to redesign corporate leadership from the ground up, it's not a one-size-fits-all. That would be the non-negotiable. That we have to be incredibly flexible about how we think about this. It's really easy and sexy to think about, there's a silver bullet here, and if we all just do this, it'll be fixed. That is the thing that derails us, is that it's not that simple. But Stephen, to kind of double click on the point that you just made about self-awareness, I think that's what it would be. Let's give everybody the opportunity. I wouldn't actually put it as a non-negotiable, to reference the language in this audience member's.
I love the juxtaposition here of what's the one thing that would be non-negotiable, and you're like, well, flexibility, which is kind of the opposite of that to begin with, which is, I mean, that's a perfect answer, but yeah.
Yeah, we can't force, unfortunately. It's so lovely to think we can just have it exactly one way for everybody, but that's the thing we're trying to fix.
Yeah, there was one part that I think we were starting to allude to in your earlier response, but I also feel like organizations today fear mistakes, right? And it's almost the opposite, right? Then they're, in a way, they're stumping their growth. Like we come from industries, right, Marisa, where you had to take risk in order to be able for growth to be there. And it almost seems like, the goal then isn't about preventing risk, but really it's about building the team's capability to either recover from it or be able to take advantage of it, right? And I kind of was taking away the sense that maybe this sense of warm leadership seems to follow that kind of philosophy, less about preventing failure and more about really fostering that right environment where people can rise to the occasion. I also feel like with some of the younger generations, it's one of the things that they're looking for more of that. So I'm curious, when you've seen leaders perhaps transition from that command and control or that to curation, what is the response from the employee base? Like what have you seen? Maybe are there some examples? Is it a dramatic shift? What does that kind of look like?
It's a really, really good question. What is the employee response to the shift? I would say the most common initial response is skepticism. Like, oh, are they really for real here? Because, like, for example, if I come in and work with a leader who is really sort of very traditional in their style, and we start to sort of untie the shoelaces a little bit, and then it gets a little looser, their people are like waiting for the next shoe to drop. Like, okay, this is like a performance that they're putting on, and it's all about to, tighten back up and at any moment. And so they're actually a little bit freaked out by it. And so there's this question of like, well, is this going to stay? And then if it is, which I don't really believe, but then what does that mean for me? Because I'm now trying to satisfy almost two masters, and I don't know necessarily, who is ultimately the person who is going to write my review or advocate for me at the end of the year when bonus decisions are being made. And so there's this really, really serious sort of rebuilding of trust that needs to take place when a leader is trying to reinvent themselves. And that's the piece I think that really underpins the success of any organization, is how much trust exists within the culture, and then how many, to use this sort of famous jar metaphor, marbles are you putting in the trust jar every day, and then also how many are getting taken out, and is that balance something that people are sort of feeling? And that's really how because it's really easy to tip that jar over, and then you're back to putting the marbles in one by one, and you lose people when that kind of thing happens.
Yeah, it's interesting. I found too in some of the work that we do as an agency. So we think about embedding this as well at the core of the organization, and so helping companies really find their purpose. Why are we here? Ends up allowing employees to really realize, okay, this is motivating to me. We're going to align around this purpose. And so it ends up not being just fake or performative empathy as we've sort of come to know it, but having that having that purpose in the core of the organization, I think really helps a lot of individuals, both externally, like target audiences or audiences, and then as well as the employee base, right? Because it's something that they can really rally around, and then it becomes a thread woven into the fabric of the culture of the organization. So I would say, for those companies that can dive deeper into their purpose and then align with it, at that point, it's not about, you're not really faking it at that point.
Yeah, that's when it starts. The purpose, we always say that's when the purpose becomes more of the boss, right? Where you're all just kind of, you take the hands off a little bit and you're all focusing on that North Star.
Yeah.
So you don't have to rely on whether this is, some leadership exercise we're going through, or, some sort of thing we're just going to do for a few weeks. No, this is what you're about, and this is what you're going to be about. And this is what, to the end of time, a lot of companies, this is what they've always been about, and they work around that purpose, and it can align leaders and employees both. Marisa, I want to switch a little bit and talk about, because this is one thing I know that a lot of companies struggle with, and even we're trying to figure it out because it's all a work in progress, is how this kind of warm leadership can be applied in a world where we're not always physically present with our teams, where we're, in that remote and hybrid kind of environment. And this has really been like a trial and error, period for a lot of companies over the past few years. And you see them, a lot of companies, I think, kind of getting into that hybrid place, but a lot are going, nope, we're all going back, or, we're all going remote. What are your thoughts about how warm leadership can be applied in that kind of situation?
Yeah, it's a really important question in an increasingly digital reality that we live in, including this interaction. I will say, from my perspective, humbly, this feels very warm to me. This conversation feels very warm. I've never had the pleasure of meeting you, Stephen, in person. Mike and I worked together in an office for many, many years, like a decade ago. And yet I still remember his energy, and I feel it exactly the same way as I felt it when I was sitting across the table from him in Newport Beach, California. And so I would say warm leadership is about presence, and it doesn't necessarily need to be in real life presence. Although I will say always in real life is better. No question about it. It's irreplaceable. And yet it is not the only thing that you can do to be present. Warm leadership is about making somebody feel something. And I think generally it's an energy that people bring, and there's some dimension of vulnerability, which is a word that is so overused, and yet overused for a good reason. I would say, for myself at least, the way I try to express it, and I would love to hear how you experience it, is about how much of yourself are you really willing to show? How much of your heart is in what is coming out of your mouth? So much of that can be seen in somebody's facial expression, in their eyes, in how close or far away they are from the screen, although that's a very much like a personal preference and sort of a stylistic choice. But you can sense if somebody's really there and paying attention, or somebody's distracted. And it's just as profound if you're sitting across a table from somebody sharing a coffee and there's a phone on the table, as somebody's sitting in a screen and you can tell that they have something off to the side, they're scrolling, right? It's an energy. You can't necessarily see it or exactly put your finger on why it's there or it's not, but you know it. I would love to hear how you experience it, if you're willing to share.
Yeah, now, what comes to mind, the things that I know I realized kind of early on what I missed in, when we were, pandemic time, we had to go full remote and all that. And I'm like, wow, I'm missing those just conversations, where about whatever, nothing business related. And we still do when we're in the office, is we've got a really nice location in the harbor, and we go on walks together sometimes. We'll just hey, who wants to go for a walk? And you're just out there connecting, on these walks. And we've had some really great, even very emotional conversations and stuff on these walks around the office building, on the outside. And so when we went to remote, it's like, okay, we're losing some of these very important points of contact, just that I miss personally, right? And so we're trying to figure out ways to do that. And right now, we have all-in days where we can get together. And really, I actually am sometimes intentionally just, hey, I'm not going to sit at my computer and pound. I'm going to use this time, just to connect with people and talk about whatever. But we also have we have coffee breaks where we call them like story time, because that's really what they ended up being, is we're learning about each other and someone's telling a story and we're just all connecting, kind of fascinated with what's going on in this person's life and some aspect of them that we didn't know. And so I really do like value, I think probably more than a lot of leaders, just those points of connection. And those are kind of precious to me, right? Because I know they've had them taken away. How do I get back to those? And so, we really, it's a work in progress, and it's something that I'm like, still feel like, no, we're not quite there, but we're trying, we're getting better at it. And, that's why we're asking a lot of these questions of people on the remote hybrid thing, because everyone's trying to figure it out. And it's just, I feel like we lost a lot, but we gained a lot too, because I can connect with my family and things like that at home. And I know that's so important to everyone, but at the same time, it's just, how do I keep that going at work? And so it's just very, very important to me, and something we put a lot of intention to, and we're continuing to work on, as we go forward. But I don't even remember what your question was, but I don't know if I answered it or not.
How do you experience presence in the construct of warm leadership? And so it sounds like for you, being really with people, and particularly out of doors, and not necessarily with an agenda, is how you most receive and give presence. Did I get that right?
I mean, no, I appreciate those times. I'm not going to get into it because I'm going to get emotional. So I mean, I do really appreciate those times with people I work with. Before we wrap up, Marisa, I'd love to ask you the question we ask all of our guests on here, some form of, do you think love belongs in business?
Absolutely. It is the foundation of being human. So why do we work except to make love more available to everybody in the world? Not just ourselves and not just our family, but to expand it out. So without question, that's an emphatic yes.
Awesome.
I love it. Marisa, can you tell everyone where they can learn more about what you do, or where they can go to?
Absolutely. We have a website, modernworkforcestrategy.com, which is right at the bottom of the screen. We are also on LinkedIn. And to sort of go back to your point about presence, I am not a really big social media gal, and I never really have been. I have a very limited social media presence personally, and I have made the difficult decision to extend that sort of philosophy into my business. I don't do any marketing, actually. I'm all referral based, and that's really for the same reasons that you want to sort of build love into scalable systems, is because that feels more authentic to me than trying and push people into something that they're not drawn to in a really sort of classic way. I'm open to being challenged on that or evolving my philosophy, but we don't have a huge amount of space on the internet, and yet we really cherish connecting with people in these mediums over podcasts and video calls, and also in person and around the world. We're very fortunate to be able to do that, and we hope to be able to touch more lives in the years to come.
Well, thank you for joining us today. This was a great conversation. I mean, I love this so much. Your insights, I think, are invaluable, and we need more people to do business with you, please. This is the kind of work that needs to be done. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on another episode of the Bliss Business Podcast. Be sure to subscribe for more conversations with leaders who are shaping the future of business. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for having me, and to the audience as well.